Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, today I would like to take you on a brief trip to Kuliang, the mountaintop community in the Drum Ridge Range outside of Fuzhou, where the foreign community gathered every summer alongside their Chinese neighbors, both from the town and from the mountain itself. Kuliang was unique. Unlike many other foreign summer communities in China, which were there until 1950, most of the families who came to Kuliang had lived in the Fuzhou area for many years, often for a lifetime, and some for generations. My own family, Donald McInnes, came at first in 1940, so he came then, and then, of course, my husband, Peter, was born in Fuzhou in 1948. That's 2 generations. Then when we came back in 1988, our 2 daughters grew up there. That's 3 generations. There were many other families who were there even for 5 generations. Because of that long shared history, the friendship, trust, understanding, and respect that grew up in this community ran very deep. This video presents 5 stories from Kuliang, drawn from the many families and memories I have gathered since 2015, when this research journey first began. Our first story is about peace. Peace is never something that just happens. It's built with courage and trust and sacrifice. And one of the most remarkable examples in Kuliang's history comes from the Caldwell family. Now, here is Gail Harris, the granddaughter of Harry Caldwell, sharing about how her grandfather risked everything to bring peace to Fujian.
I'm very happy to tell you a little bit about my grandfather's peacemaking efforts. After the 1911 revolution and the end of the Qing dynasty, hardship drove many soldiers and farmers into banditry. And the government longed for peace, and the bandits were tired as well, but nobody trusted each other. So somebody proposed Harry Caldwell, my grandfather, to be a mediator, because he had been admired and trusted for hunting man-eating tigers, and the government trusted his honesty and his fluent local dialects. So he became Fujian's bandit pacification commissioner, a bridge between law and lawlessness. Well, there was one man who had become a bandit after government soldiers had massacred his family. So he did not trust the government at all. And to win his trust, my grandfather brought his son Oliver along to the meeting. And he sent word that Oliver would stay as a hostage as proof of his sincerity. And so Chief Ding finally appeared with his men for this meeting. Well, while Oliver was spending the afternoon with a group of young bandits, even handling their guns, Caldwell, my grandfather, and Chief Ding struck a deal that brought peace to the province. And on the way home, Oliver said he had had a wonderful time. So my grandfather's courage, risking his own son's life, revealed his deep faith, his compassion and determination to protect the people he served as much as he loved and protected his own family. And he was the one that brought peace to the province.
Our next theme is friendship. Friendship was the heartbeat of Kuliang, which was a place where children grew up together, shared adventures, and formed bonds that lasted across cultures and borders and even through war. Susan Haig shares the story of her father, Bruce Hayes, who was a coast watcher, who worked as the eyes for the U.S. Air Force's Flying Tigers, whose childhood friend saved his life in a dark moment of World War II. This story shows how powerful real friendship can be.
My name is Susan Hayes Haig, and I'd like to tell you a story about how my father's boyhood friend saved his life during World War II. My grandparents spent 30 years as missionaries in Fujian, and my father, Bruce, spent his first 13 years there, having been born in Kuliang in 1923. Bruce described his life there as a series of delightful adventures and friends, both Chinese and Westerners. He was intensely disappointed when his family was stranded in California after the Japanese occupied Fujian. My grandfather returned to China alone, and Bruce became an American. He attended high school and began college, but he missed China intensely. In 1943, he had a chance to return. He was recruited upon his father's recommendation to help the U.S. Air Force Flying Tigers destroy Japanese ships in the Strait of Taiwan. He recruited and led a Coast Watcher group and was helped by his family's friends up and down the coast. But one friend in particular saved his life when he was badly wounded in the forest outside of Fujian investigating a downed Japanese airplane. A bomb detonated in his hands and face, and he was temporarily blinded and lost parts of 5 fingers. His boyhood friend, now a medical student, was notified and walked many miles to perform surgery on my father's fingers in the most primitive of circumstances. He stayed and did everything for Bruce until Bruce could be flown to the hospital in Kunming. There, my father was told that his friend's daring and skillful approach to the surgery had saved far more of his fingers than the U.S. doctors would have. Every time my dad told this story, there were tears in his eyes. The fact was, it was the power of friendship that saved his life.
From friendship, we move to understanding. Understanding begins when we stop comparing cultures to decide which one is better, and instead learn to appreciate the beauty, wisdom, and humanity in both. So Tom Hemingway will now share with us a diary entry from his relative, Dr. Ruth Hemingway, which is a reflection on Chinese and American culture that still speaks deeply to us today.
Hi, this is Tom Hemingway. I'm a relative of Dr. Ruth Hemingway, who was a medical missionary to China from 1924 to 1941. I'd like to share with you an entry from her diary upon her return to Minqing, Fujian province, after being in the US for a few months, and comparing the two cultures. It had been most interesting to compare my country with China. I marveled at the spirit of progress and efficiency, the modern knowledge and techniques, the humming speed of American civilization. At the same time, I remembered China with her long history of philosophy and high ethical teachings, her love of beauty in nature, in literature, in music, and all arts. I thought of China's young people with their great artistic ability, their high intelligence, their reverence for learning, their respect for the aged, and their passionate patriotism. I remembered Chinese ways of courtesy and gentleness. Their fine sensitivity and intuition were characteristics in even the illiterate mountain people. Even the poorest people possessed a wonderful graciousness and dignity. Confucius and Sons had given their people a great deal.
Understanding naturally leads us to respect. A century ago, a group in Fuzhou called themselves the Anti-Cobweb Society, not because they were fighting spiders. So here's the story. I would like to share with you the story of the Anti-Cobweb Society. And if you hear that name, it may sound a little strange and almost humorous, but behind that unusual name was a group with a very inspiring and visionary purpose. In the 1920s, a small community of Americans and British who lived and worked in Fuzhou, they were teachers, business people, missionaries, and diplomats. They realized something important. They said, if we want to live in harmony with our Chinese friends, we first need to clear away the cobwebs in our own minds. That was their phrase, clear away the cobwebs. They meant to sweep away the assumptions, misunderstandings, and the idea that they already had all the answers. So they formed the Anti-Cobweb Society. They met in the winter in Fuzhou and in the summer on Kuliang, and then they shared what they discovered with the larger public. In 1925, they published a book called Fujian, a study of a province in China. And later in 1933, they published Fujian, Arts and Industries. These books were not written to teach China anything. They were written so that foreigners in town and around the world could understand China better with sincerity and respect. So 100 years ago, you can already see a model of mutual learning among civilizations. In a way, the Anti-Cobweb Society reflects the heart of Kuliang's spirit, the belief that friendship begins with respect and humility and the courage to see the world through someone else's eyes. And today, the Kuliang families and those of us in the Kuliang programs, we're still following those who came walking on the same path of respect many years ago. Before we teach, we learn. Before we judge, we listen. And in order to build bridges, we need to sweep away the cobwebs within our own minds. Finally, we come to love. Love is not only emotion, it also has commitment, presence, and devotion. And it's the courage to keep showing up day after day through hardship and change. Anne Mascalino will now share the story of her grandfather, Dr. Edward Bliss, whose decades in Shawu became a living example of what love in action really looks like.
Hello, I'm Anne, and I'd like to share a story with you about my grandfather, Dr. Edward Bliss. When he arrived in Shawu in 1895, more than a century ago, he did something very simple and very rare. He slowed down. He didn't rush to teach or preach. He walked the streets, learned the dialect, and let people grow accustomed to the sound of his footsteps. Love, for him, began with presence, the kind that listens before it speaks. His first dispensary was hardly more than a room with a few bottles of medication and a small operating table. There was no glory in it. But day after day, he treated ulcers, malaria, fevers, and injuries, sometimes 50, sometimes 100 people a day. Love for him meant doing what needed to be done, even when no one was watching. Behind our family home, he kept goats and cattle so he could research animal plague, a disease killing farmers' flocks and herds. He hoped to create a vaccine poor families could afford. It was long, slow, patient work, the work of a real scientist. And he would have been happy to know that animal plague was finally eradicated worldwide in 2011. Love for him meant imagining a better future for someone else's children and refusing to give up the effort. Through revolutions, unrest, and uncertainty, he stayed. He believed trust is built not by grand speeches, but by being the person people can depend on. Love for him was steadfastness. And when he finally looked back on 40 years in China, he said the greatest work of his life was not the hospital or the research, but the students he trained, young Chinese healers who carried hope into villages he would never see. At the end of his life and his final moments, my grandfather whispered 4 words that held the truth of everything he had lived for. I love the Chinese people. These words were not an ending. They were the completion of a life lived with open hands and open heart, a reminder that real love, the kind that heals, is simply the courage to show up again and again with patience, presence, and devotion. Thank you.
I hope you have enjoyed these 5 stories, which talk about the important foundational themes of Kuliang: peace, friendship, understanding, respect, and love. They're not just memories. They're the foundation of what we now call the Kuliang spirit. They remind us that true civilization is not built by governments alone, but by people who choose to care, to listen, to help, and to love, people to people. May these stories inspire all of us, wherever we live, to carry the Kuliang spirit forward, to build bridges, and to clear the cobwebs from our own minds so that our people-to-people friendship is inspiring to everyone around us. Thank you.